All right, The Great Gatsby, Chapter 2. Chugging along. We are continuing with the exposition of the story. There really hasn't been a lot of plot development. Um, Fitzgerald is still introducing characters, locations, and there really isn't action set up, but there's just a lot of exposition. And Chapter 2 continues that to look at this location in between the West and East Egg. And remember, the West Egg is new money, rich people, but they worked for their money, and East Egg are old money people who were born into wealth. And halfway between East Egg and New York is this place called the Valley of Ashes. So, yeah, I like this picture because it kind of looks like what Fitzgerald is describing here. And I'll just read his words because I think he paints such an awesome picture of this imagery. This is the Valley of Ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the form of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally, with the transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Occasionally, a line of gray cars crawling along an invisible track gives us a ghastly creak and comes to rest, and immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud which screens their obscure operations from your sight. So this location is kind of this gray, desolate, bleak, hopeless area, almost like a purgatory that really evokes this dull, kind of immoral place. It's vastly contrasting, both Gatsby's mansion and Tom and Daisy Buchanan's mansion in both West and East Egg, and it's just this desolate area. And in the next paragraph, it talks about in this gray, bleak area is a billboard. And it's the eyes, it's this spectacle of these two eyes, and Fitzgerald calls it the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckleburg. The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckleburg are blue and gigantic. Their retinas are 1 yard high. They look out to no face, but instead from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles, which pass over a non-existent nose. And it's just these eyes that are looking over the Valley of Ashes. And it's just so random because these first two paragraphs just give this description of this area before leading into what Tom and Nick are going to be doing in this place, the Valley of Ashes. And it's really important because it's symbolic, because there's going to be some important plot development that occurs here. But also it's the place where we get introduced to Tom's mistress, Myrtle. And there's just this sense that it represents this immorality, this just sinfulness within us, within people. And the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckleburg are supposed to be the eyes of judgment, where even in this desolate area, that there is eyes of judgment, kind of like God looking over and still judging and still seeing and still has the vision to see the sins even that are done in secret. And so they come to the Valley of Ashes, where they go to a car repair shop owned by George Wilson, whose wife is Myrtle Wilson. And Myrtle Wilson is Tom's mistress. And so Tom goes there and kind of just blatantly in front of George Wilson invites Myrtle, in secret obviously, but George is there. Tom invites Myrtle to come to New York to basically have a party and an affair. And I love the way that Myrtle is described. She's this in page 25. She's described as she was in her middle 30s and faintly stout, but she carried her surplus flesh sensuously, as some women can. Her face, above a spotted dress of dark blue crepe de chine, contained no facet of gleam of beauty. but there was an immediately perceptible vitality about her, as if the nerves of her body were continually smoldering. And so she's a little bit chubby, but and not as beautiful as Daisy. And so it just gets you thinking, like, why is Tom having an affair with this woman? And then she leaves George to go with Tom and Nick to go up to New York to go to this party. And we see kind of a change in Myrtle as they continue going towards this party, and she becomes this kind of like haughty, arrogant, kind of I'm better than you person, and it's kind of represented in her change of her dress as well. She changed her costume in page 30, and with that, she kind of changes her attitude and changes her demeanor. And she works as she's a wife of a man who works in the Valley of Ashes, so they're not rich. But when she's with Tom, she acts like this kind of pretentious, old money, rich person, and kind of looking down on other people. And there lies a theme that I think Fitzgerald is trying to present. This theme that people are putting on things aren't as they appear. People are trying to appear differently than what they really are. Things aren't always as they seem. And she becomes kind of haughty, even though she's not rich. And so I think that's significant because that's going to be a revolving theme around different characters. I mean, even we saw that even in the previous chapter with Tom. He appears this gruff, manly, but he's like dumb. He's racist. He doesn't have the brains to match where his wealth should be. And then also it's represented in their marriages. Tom, later Catherine, who's Myrtle's sister, says that neither one of them, Tom or Daisy, or Tom or Myrtle, can stand the person that they're married to. And so there's constantly this illusion that people are not who they are, who they seem. So Tom is obviously having an affair with Daisy, and then Myrtle's having an affair with her husband. And again, there's like this just this deception, this deceptive quality of people, because when asked why don't they just leave their spouse then? And on the bottom of page 33, Catherine says, it's really his wife, meaning Daisy. It's his wife that's keeping them apart. She's a Catholic and they don't believe in divorce. So she's basically saying that Daisy's the reason why Tom and Daisy don't get a divorce. But Nick says Daisy was not a Catholic, and I was a little shocked at the elaborateness of the lie. And so, there's just this deception of so many different characters, the illusions, and things aren't what they seem. And that's like I said, it's such an important theme throughout the text. And that also gets reinforced in page 32 when there's this air of mystery around Gatsby. Remember, Daisy had a reaction when Nick said Gatsby, and she had this kind of like startled reaction to the name. And we're not sure who Gatsby is at this point. And then on page 32, Nick mentions that he lives next to Gatsby. And Catherine offers an interesting rumor. Catherine says, well, they say he's a nephew or a cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm's. That's where all his money comes from. And so here begins this first theme of the rumors around Gatsby and how he got his wealth. So keep that in mind, because that'll continue in the next few chapters. And then there's just like this, they go to a party, they're at this party in an apartment in New York, and Nick gets drunk. He says only 2 times in his life he's been drunk. And there's just this party, people are coming and going. Nick's meeting all these people that are like pretentious, trying to be wealthy, trying to make a name for themselves, trying to impress each other. And there's just like this superficiality of the whole party. And then an interesting conflict occurs where we're not sure why. Nick kind of dozed, and he comes to his senses when he hears Daisy, or he hears Myrtle shouting Daisy's name to Tom. So on page 37, Daisy, 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 shouted Mrs. Wilson. I'll say it whenever I want to. Daisy, And then making a short, deft movement, Tom broke her nose with his open hand. And so something must have happened. They were having some kind of argument, and Myrtle provokes Tom, and Tom, again, kind of reinforcing his character from chapter 1, is this violent, arrogant, gruffy man. He hits Myrtle and breaks her nose. And then things kind of cool down, and the party obviously is over. And Nick is just kind of, out of it. But that's an important character development. Well, not development, but just revelation about Tom, who's just this violent man who will hurt you when he feels threatened. So that'll be important. Come to another part of the story later on, but just keep that in mind. Remember that, and remember just this false appearances of so many of the different characters that we're introduced to. All right, so stay tuned for chapter 3. We'll continue on as we continue learning more about the world in which Fitzgerald is putting us into, and analyze what Fitzgerald's trying to say through this story. So give a like, subscribe, and wait for the next video on chapter 3.